We're here looking at this pretty galaxy, and I was wondering, what is this? Well, the answer isn't here, but I was intrigued. This is Dyson Sphere Project, a game that I think I bought a long time ago or paid into the early access of, because I figured it was some kind of 4X space game of the type that there exists very many of. Well, it totally isn't, apart from a few surface similarities, some cosmetic similarities. And it's a very good thing that it wasn't, because I preferred what it turned out to be. So let's find out what this game actually is. One similarity with 4X games is that we're going to be making our own little realm and expanding it across a bunch of dots in space. But that's really where the similarities end. So here are the dots in space we're going to be looking at. Well, not these ones specifically. We first randomly generate a set of stars, a star cluster, which we'll be using at some point for something, I guess. Let's move straight on to the game starting. Now, one fun feature of this game is that it has this tutorial voiceover, but it's in poorly translated Japanese to English, where the voice actor has gone right ahead and just read the wrong translation. So there's missing words, the wrong words, missing grammar, it's all good. This guy was just like, you know what, I don't get paid to edit this text, I'll just read what it says. Which I find a bit relatable, because I often read scripts written by people for whom English is a second language. They're always better than the stuff in this game. This game's particularly poorly translated, but Japanese to English is a difficult one, I know. But anyway, I thought I sometimes encounter times when I don't know if what's written is supposed to be a stylistic flair or it's a mistranslation or something, and I usually just say, well, I'll read it anyway and just see what happens. So now we appear to be playing Minecraft all of a sudden, but it's actually much more craft and much less mine. We are this robot, or perhaps a man inside a robot, I'm not actually quite sure. And we've been dumped on a planet and given the vague goal of building a Dyson Sphere, I guess. Well, maybe the name of the game is a clue about where this crafting is supposed to be going. But we have to start from the very beginning. They didn't send any stuff with us, apparently, on this project. So we have to build the basics. The mining rapidly comes to a close, as one of the first things we do is make a machine to do that for us. That's more like it. We also now need to generate power if we're going to have machines, and we use these towers to distribute power to other areas. They have a very limited range, so we're going to have power generators and power distributing towers basically all over the place, as it turns out. I think they could do with having a bit more range, but anyway, I suppose that's a balancing question. So what we need to do, effectively in the game, broadly speaking, is work our way down a tech tree, and all of the techs have various costs to unlock them. So your goal is to make factories, make machines that will produce the things you need to get these researches, and somewhere off to the far right in the research tree will be the ability to make massive space megastructures, and at some point we'll be doing that. But for now we have to make more humble products. We need to make blue cubes. That's the research cost of a lot of the early research projects. Some of them just need things you can make in yourself, and you have to do these before you can really get anywhere in the game, such as unlocking conveyor belts. Once we have conveyor belts and little arms that move things off conveyor belts into buildings, we can start playing some Factorio, basically. This is when I realized this game is just a 3D version of Factorio, which I thought was pretty good because I was planning to play Factorio at some point on this channel. Well, I can just play this instead. So we've started a machine here to make magnets, iron and copper, after I finally get the conveyor belts working. That's something. And we're going to connect it to this thing above me now, another machine that makes circuit boards and magnetic rings, which will then feed into the blue cubes machine, and after a while we've got this working. Now this will just sit here and make blue cubes on its own. Well, not quite actually, because I've made a mistake in my setup. I need the copper ingots being produced on the right to go onto the machine on the left, so we now have to have the conveyor belts kind of go over each other because I didn't leave enough space. And the upside to playing this game, instead of Factorio, is that you can just do this. We can make the conveyor belts go up in the air and come back down again. Because we're in 3D instead of 2D, we have way more freedom to make a machine without really planning how it's going to work very well in advance. We don't need to be particularly good to make a machine that will work well, because we have more options, basically. And I was completely up for this. I was relieved to see I could do this, basically. So we're going to come up with a not particularly elegant looking, but still pretty short and efficient route forwards. I don't think the conveyor belts use power, so it doesn't use more power to lift stuff up and then bring it down again later or anything like that. I don't think there's any downside other than it looks a bit messy, I guess, but it also looks cooler, I think, to have bridges going over each other. Well, that's just what I think. So, ultimately we have our blue cubes making factory. We can bring the cubes into ourselves, and then any blue cube related research can progress. But after making my blue cube machine, I thought, well, that's actually not very good. I immediately had ideas for making a much better blue cube machine. And I needed some more space, so I just walked off from the starting area. We're going to abandon that initial base and find somewhere else to make it again. Luckily, not far away, there's another bunch of iron and copper, the basic resources for making all of the early game stuff. So we're going to set up what is essentially a copy of that early base, but better, down here. And in particular, this time, I'm sort of arranging it in avenues, in tiers, leaving lots of space for me to be able to add more machines to the same part of the production process later, if we need to scale up how many things we're producing, because we have no idea how many magnets, for example, this machine will ultimately need, or how many blue cubes I need to come out of the end, I should say, at the end, and thus how many things in the intermediary stages we need. So we need loads of space in the middle of the machine to make it bigger. That's the goal. So we have the zigzagging conveyor belts taking the stuff gradually from the top of the machine towards the bottom. It's being refined by other machines along the way and may eventually reach our cubes producing machines. I had some fun wrangling with this sorting box. What I was trying to do is make it so that the conveyor belt coming out of the smelting area would split the magnets and the iron ingots apart from each other onto two different conveyor belts. Because right now, we've got them on the same conveyor belt in front of the production machine, and the little arms that bring materials into those machines can't move side to side at all. So if the wrong thing is in front of them and the conveyor belt is stopped, as it is now, then the machines just stop working. After a while of failing to get something like that working, I just gave up and made another different conveyor belt system to bring everything in, so more weird looking bridges going on, but again it looks sort of advanced in some way. So there we have it. We've got some stuff producing raw materials at the top. It's refined once, then manufactured into something else, and then that's turned into cubes, and then we end up having the cubes come out of their own conveyor belt system. Because while we can do the research inside ourselves, what you're supposed to do is send the research cubes into research labs. These confusingly are the same building that makes the cubes. They also consume the cubes if you put them on a different mode. So we're going to have one strip of things making cubes, another strip of them using them up, and now research is being done on its own. So you might note, we've done it. We've made a gameplay progress machine. I don't have to do anything now. If I just stand here as I am, we are making progress in the game. This is exactly the sort of thing that every game should be like. I was delighted when I realized, wait a second, there are going to be moments in this game when if I just stopped playing, it would still progress. I can just chill or walk around the planet or build something pointless, and it's still progressing the game for me in the background thanks to my prior work. How satisfying. This is what I'm talking about. I ended up going back to the original build site. What I wanted to do is put a lab here so that our Blue Cubes machine is actually doing a little bit of something, even if it's doing it inefficiently. What I can actually do is completely remove this entire thing by deconstructing it, because this puts it back into your inventory, so I could take all the buildings and put them in my bigger machine where they would be doing more work, I suppose. Well, I didn't, so that spot will remain as a museum piece, my first machine still working forevermore. This coal mine here is to supply my robot's coal habit. We eat coal for power right now. You have to pick something to power your robot and have it be in this little chamber the whole time. Otherwise you can't really take any actions. So we've got our coal collection, and with some spare coal we can also generate power here. These thermal power plants I don't think cause any pollution or anything like that. The only downside to using them over a massive wind farm is that there's a finite supply of coal on the planet, so you can't leave that running forever. It will eventually stop. Now I wanted to build something on this crude oil seep I discovered near our main base. However, we see an example here of how my mind completely breaks down The second I have some sort of nested project. I needed to get steel before I could make the oil extraction machinery. So I now have 2 projects, to make oil extraction and to make steel. But having a nested project, one within the other, seemed to completely break my ability to plan, and we have clips here of me just walking around, changing direction, doing nothing, as flickers of ideas come into my ADD-infested brain, completely unable to do anything, paralysed by the conflicting ideas that I need to make a steel factory, and my brain saying, no, we don't want to make steel, we want to make oil, and then going, but wait a minute, wasn't there some reason we needed to do the steel for the oil? No, we want to make oil. Eventually, some sort of indecision comes to an end, and I start putting down a smelter near the iron production area, and that's going to set us on the route to making steel. And now that we're actually underway, we can focus down this one task, start forgetting about the oil thing, and I appear to be back in control of the game, now not taking quite such nonsensical actions. Just an example of the difficulties I seem to encounter planning to do anything. While doing this, we invent the red cube, and that's going to be the next phase of the game. Most of the text beyond the beginning will need at least these red cubes as well, but the cubes require you to have liquid hydrogen. That's something that's a little bit difficult to make. The only way I recognize to make it in this recipe tooltip is as a byproduct of refining oil. So it comes back to this oil thing. We actually do need to use that oil seep for something, it seems. The other ingredient was energized graphite. We can get that by just refining coal, so I made this little base to the northeast of the main base. That's just going to be dedicated to making energized graphite out of a coal vein. I was convinced though that there must be some better way to get hydrogen. For example, you can make little extractors that pick up water from the lakes nearby, and I thought surely there's some tech or something that lets us separate the water into hydrogen and oxygen. Well, maybe there is, but I didn't find one if there was, so it came down to the fact I would have to make refined oil and then take the liquid hydrogen as a byproduct and just use that for our main production, although it's not going to get us very much liquid hydrogen. My ultimate decision here was to procrastinate by building the red cubes factory even though we don't have the components. I thought maybe while I'm building the factory, I'll think of something or invent something and something will get better and I won't have to just make a massive oil refinery to get out of this situation. I'm putting down these labs in a second row to be the red cubes research area. That's not actually how the research things work. When these buildings are used for research instead of production, they can use all of the cubes at once. Well, we'll get back to that in a second, because eventually, here it is. I've managed to make my oil extractor, and next to it, we have this oil refinery. So we need to extract the byproduct from that oil refinery and send it off to our new red cubes factory. What I was worried about though, is that I hadn't invented any kind of pipe. I was like, how do I get the oil out of the extractor to the refinery? I eventually thought, well, I guess I'll just try putting down a conveyor belt. Maybe we can slop the oil onto the conveyor belt and sort of somehow convey it into the refinery. The good news is that this oil just comes in cubes. The game does sort of distinguish between liquids and solids, but it lets you use the conveyor belt for both, essentially. So we just have cubes of liquid that go around into the refinery, and you can see I've set up this conveyor belt that shoots off towards our cubes factory, ready to receive that liquid hydrogen, another liquid that will be in cube form and can just be conveyed away. We need a second output though, because we're going to be making this refined oil. And this stuff is a liquid. I originally was just going to leave it here doing nothing, but if it's on the conveyor belt, it blocks the output of the liquid hydrogen as well, because the refinery just shuts down when its output is blocked. So what we need to do is get rid of the oil somewhere. This is where the distinction between solid and liquid actually does come in, because we need to make a liquid tank to store it. So we conveyor belt it into the tank, after which point it becomes liquid again effectively, and then gradually fills up the tank. Therefore, we're now going to have a nice stockpile of oil for later when I'll probably need it. It keeps the refineries going, and the liquid hydrogen is now shooting off towards our red cubes factory district. And of course we've got plenty of space here, leaving a nice row for us to add more refineries. Then we just connect their output to the existing conveyor system, and boom, the output in liquid hydrogen can go up, and our red cubes output can go up. I also conveyed in the energetic graphite from the other direction, And now we have everything the cube factories need, and indeed our little sushi cycle of red cubes is there, ready for the labs to pick up and start munching on. We do lack liquid hydrogen production in volume though, so we're not going to be making very many. But yes, there were millions of researchers now that needed these red cubes, so I entered another phase where I can sort of sit back and just let all of this stuff happen as the next phase of the game begins to unlock in the background. I realized though that the labs do need all of the cubes at once. It's not like the red cube labs only focus on the red part of the science or something. You need to bring in all the colors to a centralized lab district, and where the cubes are actually being produced doesn't matter so much. But for now, it's going to be easy enough. We just bring in the blue cubes from the blue area nearby, and now the science will start happening. Thus we enter another phase where I don't necessarily have to do anything to progress now. I can just stand and watch the pretty colours going past. This is good gameplay. However, this is only the beginning, of course. It's going to get more and more complicated as we need more and more colourful cubes to continue our progress. I started playing around with this stuff called Proliferator, a sort of orange goop that we can make out of coal somehow. And this goop can be sprayed onto your production lines to buff them in some way. So I think here we're increasing the amount of red cubes we can theoretically make by spraying this goop onto the graphite. I don't really know what this is supposed to be in manufacturing terms, it's just a thing. We can somehow make our machines be a bit better by lubricating the ingredients going into them or something. I think we need to put it on more of the stuff going in for it to actually work in that case. But it's an excuse to have more conveyor belts going around, so that's always nice. Now I've unlocked the ability to fly, which is quite useful. It uses up tons of your power, so I can't fly for very long with my sucky mech. We might be able to upgrade that later. But that's nice to know. And it's always nice to trigger some mistranslated tutorial dialogue as well. It's just reassuring to hear that nice voice saying it all completely wrong. So here I am flying around. It is a useful way to get from one side of the base to the other, because it is getting increasingly big. There we can see the expanded version of the oil refinery infrastructure, producing plenty of liquid hydrogen, and also now using the oil for something. I'm just burning it in these power plants and storing a little bit. A bit wasteful, because I was sure I was going to need the oil for something real later on, but the power is useful. We also unlock another flying related thing, the Mecha Sail. This is essentially an upgraded version of flying that allows us to fly high and fast. So at first I thought we can just use this to get around the planet real quick and utilize the fact it doesn't use much energy to fly at high altitude. But actually you can just fly really fast straight up and leave the planet altogether. We can just reach escape velocity, and all of a sudden, before I knew it, I was drifting in space, and I was like, oh, I wonder if I'm supposed to be up here. There's nothing for me to do in space yet, anyway. So I just drifted towards this gas giant. The planet we're on is a moon of this gas giant, so it's very close by. What I wanted to find out is, can I sort of land on the gas? How does this work? So I kind of flew at it, cautiously wondering what would happen. It seems you sort of float over the surface of a gas giant. We actually get an achievement there, which turned out to be a very rare achievement. I think you're not really supposed to use a coal-powered mech to fly in space, but there you go, there's at least an achievement for doing it. We're not going to achieve anything in gameplay terms though, because we're just here. We don't have the equipment, I guess, to do anything on the surface of the gas giant. So with that, I very quickly decided to go back, and that was the end of my first jaunt in space. I thought I'm probably going to run out of coal and get stuck on a gas giant. I'd better go home. The only issue then was how to land, and just sort of crash landing into the ground seems to be okay. And we've just about run out of fuel, so that's all good. Luckily, I happened to crash land near where I was stockpiling all of the coal, so we can quickly go and have a nice meal for the mech, and then we'll be fine. We've got absolutely loads of coal. Could really use something better. We actually could use the oil, for example, as fuel instead of the coal, but I think you can't carry as much, so it's a little bit more inconvenient. We have to make dedicated fuel rods. That's what we're supposed to be doing at this stage, but I hadn't worked that out. Here's a little look at the Red Cubes factory now in its vertical configuration. I worked out that you can stack certain buildings on top of each other. This means me leaving loads of space to expand horizontally isn't so necessary, but it's still useful as well. Basically, that little red factory and the research area are going to have plenty of space to be expanded in the future if we need to be doing a lot more with it, and I'm sure we will at some point. Here's my next fun project. While the Red Cubes factory is doing its thing, I can do my thing, going for a jaunt towards the other side of our little planet/moon. there are all these oil deposits, and I wanted to try and slap down some oil extractors on them. It looks like the oil is infinite at first, but actually the way oil works is there's no finite amount, but you get diminishing returns, so the more you bring up, the less is coming up. So you just have a ever declining supply of oil. So for that purpose, I wanted to future-proof things by just bringing all the oil to the refinery as early as possible from all over the planet. I'm also doing this. I had this vague plan to just cover all of the unproductive parts of the planet in wind turbines to give us tons of nice green energy. Strategically even leaving the forests alive. This is very kind of me, I suppose. It has a backup benefit in that the wind turbines slightly transmit power. They act like power lines over very short distances. So we end up having a power line that goes all the way around the planet. That means when I need to get power to, say, a remote oil extractor on the other side of the planet, we've already got this line of infrastructure that we can use instead of having to put in tons of Tesla towers to transmit the power. So maybe some resources were saved by building in that particular configuration. And here is the result. We now have tons of power generation going on. We have so much that we don't really need to be generating it using the oil power plants. I was cautious to not be burning the oil off because there is going to be a finite amount, or at least a diminishing amount as mentioned earlier. So I wanted to turn the power plants off. I couldn't find a way to easily do this. I wanted to see some sort of button that just made the power plant not operate but otherwise sit where it was. We can achieve turning it off by deleting all of the inputs, but that seems like a less elegant solution. Maybe there is a way to just disable a building, or maybe not. So with them off, we're going to need more oil storage, I guess. We'll just keep stacking it up. Luckily, these fuel tanks are things that can stack vertically, so it's going to be easy enough to store tons of oil in a small space. Next up, we're beginning the quest, the Odyssey, to make yellow science cubes, which have much more complex ingredients than the red science cubes. So we begin here to the southwest of our refinery zone. I'm starting this new factory area where we're making these yellow blobs, organic crystals they're called. For these you need to pump in some water. What I still don't know is whether pumping the water actually reduces the sea level, because everything else in the game has a finite supply. Maybe the water is finite as well and it just doesn't really tell you about it. And this is another case where I'm grateful that you have so much freedom with these conveyor belts, because I've organised and arranged my stuff very poorly. Luckily with enough bridges we can get away with this. Now I'm here to the northwest of the refinery zone, making a diamond factory. Yes, we're going to need some diamonds for our new scheme. You can see that conveyor belt on the right of yellow organic crystals that's coming up towards this area. We're going to have this general sector of the planet be dedicated to the production of yellow cubes soon enough. So here's what we've ended up with. We're producing energetic graphite from coal, which is used to make plastic, one of the ingredients of organic crystals, combining with water and oil. I think the oil is going into the plastic as well. So now we've got some energetic graphite and some organic crystals coming up to the top here, where the graphite is turned into diamonds, but this is only the beginning of the stuff we'll need in this area. The main thing we don't have is titanium. So that's going to be the primary goal of the quest, is to somehow acquire titanium. I got quite distracted though, because I wanted to go to the other side of the planet and wire in all of the oil reserves. Because I'm now actually using the oil as part of the manufacturing process, I wanted to guarantee a long-term supply. Because you have this diminishing returns thing, I knew that at some point I wouldn't be paying attention and I'd come back and find the oil supply had diminished too much to operate the factory. So I just went for absolute overkill. Now you just saw me there looking at the planetary logistics station I can now build. I thought the planetary logistics station was going to be what I needed to get titanium, given that there isn't titanium on this planet, so I thought, well, we need some planetary logistics. That's not really how it works, but for now, you'll see me progressing towards getting the planetary logistics station. And this starts another tangent to our manufacturing quest to make graphene. For that, we first need a supply of sulfuric acid, for which we combine water, oil and stone in this new factory district next to the plastic factory. All good for pollution, I'm sure, in this area. So once we have sulfuric acid, we can combine it with graphite, I think it is, to make graphene, and then I can start building things that I don't necessarily need. And speaking of doing that, I built this EM cannon. This is like part of the Dyson Sphere section of the manufacturing quest that we're not really at, but I had the ability to build it, so here it is, a big gun. The idea is you can manufacture solar sails, lightweight solar panels, put them in the gun and shoot them at the sun. They might go into a stable orbit if you're quite lucky, and then you can get some of the power back by having the solar sails shoot lasers effectively at the planets and try to pick up the lasers and convert them into electricity. So that's a plan. We're going to need the graphene for that as well. And while I could do it, I didn't really want to. Instead, I was focused on trying to get titanium somehow, and we're doing this the hard way and the way that actually doesn't work, as we'll see. So we finally got our graphene factory going. Now it's outputting it. We don't need to have it go into another machine or anything, I just need to craft a thing with it. So effectively I need to pick up a bunch of graphene, but why stand here clicking on it when we can make the game do it for us? So I essentially make a box and put a robot arm moving the graphene into the box. And then I can AFK by the looks of things anyway, or I was just chilling in some way. We stand and wait for a massive pile of graphene to have been made. Then I can just put it into myself and gradually start crafting that planetary logistics station, which took about 5 minutes as well, so I probably AFK'd for that while it was crafted. We eventually have this big tower, and I came to slap it down near the research district because I was originally thinking I could just ship the titanium to here, make the yellow cubes right next to the research district and then feed them straight on in. However, as it actually said on the screen while I was placing this thing, it's not used for shipping materials between planets. It actually kind of confused me. I think this might be the mistranslation, I suppose. It kind of implied this is something towards being able to move things between planets. It's more about moving things around on a planet. So instead of collecting oil from the back and conveyor belting it to the front like I am now, I could ship it to the front using these stations and putting little drones on them. Although I'm not sure that's any more efficient or anything. So essentially, we have this big tower, and I didn't use it for anything in the end, but later on, we are going to be able to use that for something, so it's going to pay off eventually. For now, we just need to get back on task and do what I was supposed to be doing that whole time. We need to get some titanium. So to do that, we're going to start this epic quest. To start with, I'm putting a ton of oil in myself, so I have plenty of fuel. That's because I need to go out here to Arioth 1, the planet right in the center of our solar system, because, as you might have seen on the tooltips flashing on the right there, it has titanium ore and tons of it. So I need to go there and get some titanium. The problem is that's very inefficient. Normally, you could make ships to move things between the planets, and this is the tech I need to do that, as it turns out. After a bit of research, I finally worked out where I was supposed to be going with all this. However, you need to have some yellow cubes to unlock the ability to do this, and I need that titanium to get the yellow cubes, so I end up at a bit of an impasse. I actually can't get the machine I need to do this automatically. However, I can do it manually, and that's why I was filling myself with oil. We're going to fly into space for real this time and actually go and get something and bring it back with the hopes of one day making infrastructure that will do this for us. So we take off and float away. I was being too pessimistic with the whole fuel thing because I completely forgot, oh yeah, in space there's no resistance to movement, so like once you've accelerated, you'll just float to your destination. You don't need to expend fuel to keep going, although if you do it's faster. We basically escape the gravity well and won't really decelerate very much. And then after a few minutes of floating we arrive at the planet. Wasn't really sure how to land, so I spent a lot of time decelerating and thinking maybe you have to enter orbit and then sort of gracefully drop down. You really don't need to, just flying into the floor is sufficient. And here we are, on a lava planet in the middle of our solar system. Nice and hot, not very nice looking. You can actually see where we just came from over there, which is pretty cool. So now that we're here, we need to get some titanium and bring it back somehow. And you can see on the right there are surface veins of titanium with tons of stuff for us to pick up. Luckily, I brought a load of things with me on this quest to make my life here a bit easier. Firstly, I crafted a load of these geothermal power plants. They were no use to me back at home, but here we can dump them into the lava to make power, so electricity isn't going to be an issue while we're here, that's for sure. The other thing I crafted was a load of mining machines and a load of smelters. which allows me to set up shop next to one of the veins, have this production line making smelted titanium ingots, and then put them in a box. And once again, we just stand next to a box waiting for it to fill up, essentially some more AFK action. That's going to make a bunch of titanium. We're going to ship it home manually in our inventory once there's enough to fill it up. But because my inventory is currently half full of oil still that I don't really need, we're going to have a little oil reserve here on the planet that I set up just to clear space. This actually revealed something I didn't realize, that liquids do work a bit differently to solids, in that you can't just sort of click to put them in a container. You have to put them in your hand, I guess, like in the mouse, and then you hold it over the container and kind of pump it in. So a bit of actual mechanics representing what you're supposed to be doing in this abstraction. Pretty nice, although it would have been fine if it wasn't there. It's certainly not there for every other type of interaction you can do. So now it's time for some more AFK action as I stand around. I wasn't completely idle though. I ended up expanding the storage space quite a lot, because I thought once I'm gone I might not bother coming back for a long time, so let's have loads of storage capacity. We'll just leave this machine on the other planet whirring away, making a gigantic pile of titanium, and one day we could come back and get it, or ideally something will come and pick it up for us. I didn't quite fill my inventory up before leaving. For no good reason. I did it most of the time and then got bored right at the very end, I guess, and flew off. Well, that was a bad decision because the place we need to go, back home, is about as far away as it can be right now in the orbital patterns of the solar system. Oh well, doesn't really matter, does it? We're just going to float for a few minutes longer. Looks like I didn't jump high enough to escape the planet and we started falling back down, but eventually we burned some fuel and away we go. We'll fly all the way home. I had to fly past the sun on the way, and your robot is actually called Icarus, but luckily there is no downside to flying particularly close to the sun, that I've discovered yet anyway. So here we are, we crash landed back home, then I made this pile of boxes, and boom, we have a temporary titanium ingots supply, which we'll need for various things to get more titanium ingots effectively. So let's see how far this supply can get us. We convert the titanium into some kind of titanium crystal or titanium alloy, some special thing, which is then combined with diamonds, and here we have it. The Yellow Cubes factory is operational. The only downside is that we can't use the Yellow Cubes right now because we're really far away from the research district. Now, what we could do is make a conveyor belt that took the cubes to the district, and that would be easy and cheap in resources to make. But there's another way of doing it. We can slap down the planetary logistics tower, or another one I should say, so that I can use the one I originally built near the research district and ship the cubes over there. It's actually not that far, it's like 10% of the planet's circumference or something. So this is probably supposed to be used for much longer journeys, but since I made the mistake of already making a tower, we're going to double down, throw that good money after bad, and ship the cubes to here, and then it will be a short journey by conveyor belt to our research matrix lab buildings. And it's nice to see the little things carrying the stuff through the sky as well, although it's sort of littering my skyline actually, these giant towers. I don't really like the look of them. After 3.5 minutes I worked out how to get the cubes to actually come out of the tower at the end. It works a bit differently to other things, but eventually we have cubes flowing past the thing that wants the cubes. So we now for a short time have automatic yellow tier research. We need to first research this titanium alloys thing I'm doing right now. That's just a smelted version of titanium that you need to build the interstellar stuff that we're going to need shortly. So we research that and research the interstellar thing. However, just as I started making this new titanium alloy, I ran out of my temporary titanium supply, unfortunately, and we did not manufacture enough alloy to build the tower that I need to make a permanent supply of titanium ingots. Therefore, we're going to have to go back and do some more manual running. Now that's not necessarily a problem, we've got plenty of fuel, and we know it's quite easy to actually travel between the planets, it just takes a while. There was one issue that arose though. In between my previous journey and this one, I'd forgotten the controls. So you can see I fly right past my destination. Here is some quality gameplay. The thing is, to move yourself towards where the cursor is pointing, you have to press W, but I had it in my head that W was how you accelerated. So, knowing that I didn't want to accelerate, I was not pressing W at all. That means I'm not really steering properly, and we shoot right past the planet, and not only that, I now can't turn around without really pressing W either, so we're in trouble. And there's another source of trouble. We have no energy left in the mech. The energy will gradually come back because we do have fuel in the mech, which will be burned and turned into energy, but for now, I can't really maneuver at all. I'm just floating into space. We've got the classic space nightmare. We're just going to fly off forever now, unless I can work out how to turn this thing around. I eventually started doing some antics. I still wasn't pressing W, but you can sort of turn around by changing your rotation in various ways by pressing like Q and R. So by doing some weird maneuvers and then waiting in between each maneuver to gradually get some more energy from our probably very inefficient fuel sources, still doing coal-powered spaceflight. We've got some steampunk aesthetic going on here. Well, I eventually start turning vaguely towards the planet, and here we are going roughly in the right direction, still not pressing W, so I can't course correct. Instead, I slow down once I'm near the planet, but the planet is now moving away from me. I managed to somehow progress towards the planet by adjusting the rotation again. We're now moving really slowly as well because I decelerated so much, thinking that maybe if I go slow I'll get captured in the planet's gravity or something and just get sucked towards it. Well, I think I, at some point, must have pressed W a little bit to speed up, which would have also tilted me towards the planet, and we do eventually fall down to it, which helps out. Now we pick up the titanium and just stand here for a bit because this pylon will charge my battery up faster than the fuel burning will. So we get the energy back, and then I catapult myself towards our home planet. This time, I think I remembered the controls because I just went in a straight line. Not really sure what was up with that little lost in space adventure, but it's over now. The drama is done, and we did get the titanium ingots, so now we'll make titanium alloys, and with any luck, we're going to get a lot closer to not having to do that ourselves again, although we'll have to do it at least one more time, because we'll need to go and build some stuff on that other planet. Since my titanium usage infrastructure is here, it would be good to have the planetary deliveries land here as well. So I started trying to use the water. You can build these foundation blocks that let you build on the water, although they're actually quite expensive to make in that they require steel and processed stone, which I tend not to have that much of. Well anyway, eventually I started building this platform I could use to make a tower. I didn't know how big it was going to be. It was smaller than I thought, so I've made more tower than I need. But that looks okay. It looks kind of realistic the way that space infrastructure is often put out to sea for various safety reasons. And now we have a bigger eyesore tower next to our smaller eyesore tower, which is very inefficient because it turns out the big tower can also do everything that the small tower can do. So we don't need the small tower here at all. The whole logistics thing is getting worse and worse in this design, but we're leaving it. We refuse to improve. So after building that, I had to craft another one and then slap it down on the other planet. So there we go, we now have two hubs that can link to each other using logistics ships. Now I just need to wire in the titanium from here into the tower, and we can even empty out our massive amounts of stored titanium to very quickly build up a supply here. I've set the tower to be on supply mode for titanium. The tower at home will be on demand mode, and that will make any ships that can go into space automatically start ferrying stuff between them. And there we go, a shipment departs the lava planet. It is working, and you might wonder if this is consuming any fuel or something sending stuff through space. Well, actually they're electric ships, so that's something. However, it's using way more power than this planet can provide to do that. So we need to expand the power generation here. At first I put down a big wind farm, but this planet actually has less wind than the other ones, so the wind farms aren't so effective, and they're not that effective to begin with. Essentially I need to go back, craft some more geothermal power plants, and then come back here to slap them down. But we will have to come back here for several things as it turns out, so we'll be back to sort that planet out. For now, here's a look at the other end of the process. The titanium is coming out on our home system, and there we go, it's feeding into our systems and everything will be good from now. We've got automatic titanium generation at long last. I was mainly feeding it towards the titanium alloy production. We turn off a filter on the conveyor belt splitter, Now it will evenly contribute to making the construction materials, the alloys here, which we're going to limit the supply of, or the maximum supply of there, so that more titanium will eventually be forced through into the yellow cubes production line, because yellow cubes is what we really want out of all this. There's another delivery, and out will come another burst of titanium. So it's not a continuous supply here, it's a bit worse than having the mine be local, but it's still pretty good, and it's pretty flashy. We managed to use some mechanics in the game, just about as poorly as you can use them, but it is working in the end. The yellow cubes are coming out, and will continue to come out for a long time, even if I don't do anything. And of course then they're inefficiently shipped over to the research area, where they are fed into the labs, and now we're working here on some solar sail upgrades, which is a clue about what we're going to start doing with our newfound yellow world of science. After a while, I've built 2 massive conveyor belts to ship some stuff over to near the research area. We've got graphene and some kind of lens thing, some stuff made out of circuit boards and lenses. We're going to use these to make our new solar sails, and in the process I essentially discovered that it's easy enough to just make a giant conveyor belt. So yes, that whole logistics thing was probably a waste of stuff. But here I am making these sails. Now, I was confused a little bit at first, because when they call them solar sails, I thought they meant something you would use to travel through space on, like a large surface to catch the light pressure or the solar wind or something and very slowly accelerate through space over time. But it's more like a very small or lightweight solar panel that you put into a gun and launch at the sun, so it has some nice solar stuff to absorb. So we load up the gun using the sails. But now there's going to be a few issues that will prevent us really getting any further than this for now. It's night time. Well, that's a problem. I didn't think of that until right then. I was like, oh yeah, I guess we can't shoot them into orbit if we can't see what we're firing them at. Theoretically, you could if you fired them at a certain angle so they go and rotate around things and end up at the right spot. But the way this gun works, it's very high velocity, so it needs direct line of sight on the place where it needs to end up, basically. And that's hampered the next day by the fact we're orbiting a gas giant. So that gas giant, while it's hard to see it, can be blocking a lot of the sky a lot of the time. So now, even while the sun is out, we also can't fire the solar sails. Basically, being on the edge of the solar system and orbiting something that's gigantic very closely means we have very poor access to the middle, so this is really the worst place to try and do this Dyson stuff from. But it is here, and eventually it happens to get the line of sight and starts launching things away. The most curious thing about it is that it doesn't make a sound. We have a very efficient stuff launcher. It completely silently shoots off into the distance, so those solar panels will now be somewhere, I suppose. I'm not quite sure how the solar panels stop once they reach their destination. They're being fired into orbit completely directly. They just stop when they hit the orbital point. Maybe they have some sort of retro rockets on them. And here we have this diagram of what's orbiting the sun, or what machinery is orbiting the sun really. And you can see the dots are now starting to line up and begin to orbit around it. So we'll gradually have an increasing number of these little solar panels orbiting the sun, and in the top right you can see our power generation capacity is going up because of it. Although that power is in the solar panels, they have it. How are they going to get it to me? How do I put it into my general machinery on the planets? Well, that's the next problem we're going to face. Basically, we're currently setting up a completely pointless, gigantic, stellar solar power plant that's actually not that powerful anyway, and that actually gives us no power whatsoever. The way to start remedying this is to build a ray transmitter, or a ray receiver I should say, this big dish which can receive laser signals from the solar array and convert them into power. But this has similar issues to our solar sail launcher. It doesn't work at night, and it's not going to work half the time during the day because the gas giant is blocking line of sight. So this isn't going to give us very much power even in ideal scenarios, and there's a whole bunch of transmission loss from converting it into lasers and sending it through space. So basically, the not all that large power generation of the array is going to be scaled down even further to a smaller amount of generation for a very small amount of time, so the actual average wattage we'll get out of this extremely expensive and complex way of generating power is negligible. It's barely made a dent on the power graph. And after that I was like, well, I guess that didn't work, and concerned myself to just making science. We don't need to be doing any of that. I just had the opportunity to do so, and I felt like maybe it would be a good idea, but not really. However, I didn't give up on it completely, which brings me here to our inner planet. Here we're actually so close to that solar array, you can see it from the surface orbiting the star. Very pretty. Well, what I was thinking is, because here we're closer to the target area, we'll make better use of these ray receivers, because they're going to have line of sight a lot of the time, and maybe there'll be less transmission loss as well. Plus, this planet would be a better place to launch the solar sails from, because it's nearby and there's no gas giant getting in the way. Here, the addition of that solar power does make a visible difference on the graph for a moment, but not really. We completely don't need this, because our power generation capacity just from like geothermal power plants and wind generators is fine. We're not even using the fact that I have unlocked fusion power plants. We could make deuterium and just fuse it to get tons of power, but we're not doing this. We're doing it the more sci-fi way, by making a megastructure around the star, I guess. That is the name of the game after all. Now, I started looking around the planet here because I had an idea. I was thinking maybe there's some point on the planet that can see the star most of the time, like how towards the North Pole or something. Sometimes it's daytime all the time, that sort of thing. I thought there might be some spot where I can shoot over the horizon of the planet, even in unfavourable seasons, and still just about see the orbit of the star, so that we can have our solar sails being launched out constantly. And you do need to do this because the solar sails have a finite lifespan, so they need constant replacement. At first I wanted to see if I could make a hill or something, make a big pillar, and then put the gun on top of that so it had better line of sight. I don't think you can. Well, I gave up trying to find out if I could do that. In the end, I just needed to put the gun here, sort of at the top of the planet, and then make a massive conveyor belt all the way around the planet and a ton of power transmitters as well, to start bringing solar sails up to fire out of it. This sort of works, I guess. I didn't really stand here for long enough to monitor whether in the summer season or something we would never be able to see the star, which is the risk of putting it at such a high latitude. But for now, when I was here just after setting up the production line, it appears to have a great view of places to shoot these solar sails to. They're all over the place, a huge wide arc on the sky, and it can just fire away. And of course, the solar sails are going to be transported to this planet using the return journeys of those titanium freighters. So now we're actually making use of the fact they're returning all the time. It's a bit more efficient in that regard, I guess. Looks like I didn't give up on these ray receivers. I put another one back home. What I really need to do is cover half the planet in these things, so that when it's daytime on one side of the planet, it will be receiving them and transmitting them over to the nighttime side, and maybe just generally getting around to the fact it's blocked by the gas giant half the time, by having receivers all over the place, and different angles might be able to see the stars sometimes. So that's that. I did end up putting some more receivers down, but I don't think it had any appreciable effect. It was a gigantic waste of time overall, but maybe later we'll find a better way of doing all this, and as mentioned, I'm not bothering to use most of the actual power generation tech, and I'm still powering the mech on coal, for example. We could be doing much cooler things. Here's an example of what I do when every time I need to craft something, I walk around the factory trying to remember where all the stuff was, picking it up. We're doing it nice and inefficiently, no central storage or anything like that. Here I am floating through space, now towards the end of the next big development. And it's nice to see our solar sails have formed a pretty ring around the sun that we can now fly almost up to on our way to the lava planet. And why am I going to the lava planet? Well, it's because there's one other thing this planet has that our home planet doesn't: silicon veins. And from here we can see a nice close-up view of those solar ring systems we've created. Very nice. So just like with the titanium, I need to make a mining and extraction system to get that silicon back into the main machine on the other planet. And it's exactly the same deal. We mine it, we smelt it right here next to the mines, and then I make a massive conveyor belt system to bring it back to where all the rest of the stuff is on this planet. We are not going to bother with any planetary logistics stuff this time. I'm pretty sure this is the better, or at least simpler, way to go. It requires fewer resources in your inventory to make this at the very least. So soon, the silicon is being loaded up, and the same transports that take titanium can take silicon as well. There is of course a limited capacity here, but I do still have space to put more ships on this platform. So if it looks like not enough stuff's coming, we can potentially expand the supply by throwing in more ships, but again they're annoying to craft, so I don't really want to max out the number of ships at the moment. And where is that silicon going? Well, it's here at this machine I built earlier back home. It gets turned into microchips and then processors. It also gets turned into silicon crystals. I noticed though that the crystals and processors are actually being output onto the same conveyor belt because I messed everything up. So after some brief restructuring, we now have this machine spitting out silicon crystals and processors, which we need for our next machine, and the goal of that is to create the next colourful cube, a purple one this time. This section is producing particle fibers, I think they were called, once I get these processors off the belt. They're a combination of carbon nanotubes, titanium and the silicon crystals. The nanotubes are, I think, just a combination of graphene and something else that's happening at the other end of that conveyor belt, nothing too special. So now we're spitting out these very special wires which get combined with those processors from earlier over at the Purple Cubes factory, and now we should have the capacity to spit out these cubes slowly because we're not producing very many processors. We are producing quite a lot of everything else. We need to up the processor production, as that's the weak link in our chain, but the principle is demonstrated. There's a purple cube going actually about halfway to the research district by conveyor belt, and then just to make use of our logistics system, I also put it into the same very inefficient transportation system as the yellow cubes, so they can be flown this short distance, requiring a massive amount of the other side of the planet to be covered in wind farms to power this super inefficient transport to get it to here. I think conveyor belts don't use any power, although I'm not actually quite sure about that. Anyway, yes, there's a shipment of purple cubes coming in, so we now have 4 out of the 5 cube types being manufactured automatically. That means we can AFK our way through most of the technology tree by this stage, but I'm sure there'll still be one more big obstacle to overcome. In the meantime, we need to go back and make that Purple Cubes factory just be good. I was just sort of getting it ready in principle. Now we need to expand all of the production lines, and we get to this point where there's a steady supply of purple cubes coming out, so that should keep us going for a while. Well, it will keep the research going while I don't have to do anything. We've also set up the green spray here. Spraying our stuff with green goop makes it produce 20% more stuff. Well, that's just science for you. I sprayed some green goop on some bread earlier, and I produced an extra 20% of a slice of toast when I put it in the toaster, and you can't argue with that. Now we're here in the tech tree screen to see that we've actually got most of the tech so far, but to progress further, I need to unlock green cubes. I should also note, by the way, that most of the techs I've unlocked here in the second third of the tech tree, I'm not using for anything. I don't even really know what they do. I just unlocked tons of stuff, and now we're actually going to have to look through and try to work out how to use it to do things, because we need to make ourselves some green cubes to progress down the main quest. I happen to have just invented one of the 2 ingredients of green cubes, the quantum chip, and I also need a lens looking sort of thing. So now it's time for an adventure in ingredients diving. We have to see what each thing is made of, discover that we don't manufacture that, so we look at those ingredients and discover that we don't manufacture the things that they are themselves made of, and it all goes down. So now it's time to massively expand the factory, basically. One thing in particular I was going to focus on was making Casimir crystals, something we were going to need. We're going to need loads more liquid hydrogen and some graphene too. And while we do produce these things, we only just about meet our needs. But on the tooltip we can see that if we have some white cubes, we can actually produce both from the same ingredient and cut out a lot of complexity in the machine. And by this point I'd actually worked out what those white cubes were. I'd seen them for the whole game, wishing I had them. They were actually closer than I think, staring me right in the face in fact, because that thing I thought was a gas giant, if I actually bothered to click on it, it's an ice giant, and it's made of those white cubes, fire ice, whatever that is, and you can also get hydrogen from it, which we could also use, although with the fire ice we don't necessarily need to mine out the hydrogen. So, now we have a quest. We need to get the ice off that thing and down here, and that will cut out part of the complexity of scaling up our planet world to the next stage. However, to make the gas giant orbital collector station, we have to make tons of other stuff, so we've got another ingredients quest. This time though, I did have everything that is needed to make it somewhere, and I thought I'd throw in here a quick rant about the annoyance of this thing in the game that kept happening really. You often need to craft something, sometimes just as simple as like a conveyor belt, and your system does have the ingredients to make it, but they're in a box somewhere, and you have to go and find them. So I'd really like to see some way for all of your surplus that you're just storing away somewhere to actually just be available for crafting as it is in some games, or at least to have the ability to order them up, to say I want to make this, and if the game detects that I actually do have the ingredients somewhere in my storage, it will start bringing it to me costing energy or whatever, or even go whole hog and just have infrastructure or things you craft be made with a separate currency and you're selling your surplus to get that separate currency, so that you don't have the big slowdowns that quite often happen, where I know what I need to do at the next stage of my quest, but actually building the orbital collector is a really slow and boring process because I'm constantly going to each ingredient, crafting as many as I can so it highlights what I don't have, then I go and find what I don't have. See, is that enough things to craft it yet? Maybe, maybe not. Wait for some more to be produced. I would like it to just say, you know what? You have invented the things you need to craft this. You are even producing them or have them stockpiled already. Just skip this stage and let me build it, especially at this late stage in the game when this has happened so many times and it's becoming more and more complex to build single objects because you need so many things from so many places. It was getting a little bit annoying, I have to say. Now it's time for some logistics antics. I need to make particle containers as one part somewhere of the big process we're going to have to go through next. For those, I'm going to need these electromagnetic turbines, which I'm producing on the right hand side, the east end of the factory world. So now I need to go and find the other two ingredients, the copper and the graphene. I had a vague idea of where to go and pick these things up from, or where to start wiring them out from, because the copper is used in the production of the processors, which is used in the production of the purple cubes, and graphene is used in the production of carbon nanotubes, also in the purple production line. So on the other side of the factory from where the turbines are coming from, we have two of the ingredients. Ideally, we'd just ship the turbines over to the other side. The problem is the nearby planetary logistics thing is full. This is the big restriction of using this flying system. You can only put 3 things in per tower. The solution is to just have more towers next to each other to unlock more slots. But funnily enough, I actually need those particle containers to make the tower. Now I can just craft them in my inventory by walking around and picking up all of the ingredients, but I took that as a sign that I should instead do something more stupid, and something that I thought intuitively has got to be the better option, and that is to go even further when it comes to just putting giant conveyor belts everywhere. I'm going to put a conveyor belt that goes across the entire factory. But to make sure it's not going to be in the way or block our future expansion in this nice open space I've left in the middle, well, it's just going to be up there. It turns out you can build conveyor belts really high up, and I don't think there's any downside to doing this. You're not spending more resources to do so or anything. I guess it makes the route technically longer, so these resources take longer to travel along the conveyor belt as they go up and down. But that doesn't really matter. Looks like our EM cannon is just about avoiding shooting the conveyor belt as it goes up there. I guess it is going to block line of sight, so that's a potential downside to have the sky covered in stuff. It also takes tons of our own mech's energy to build things up there because our drones have to fly quite far, so I guess that's a downside. But in the end, we have this ridiculous conveyor belt that just goes around the planet, and I love the way that it actually goes with the curvature of the planet, and it's sort of visible once you zoom out and look at it from a distance. Very cool. I want more of these. I just don't really have any justifiable need for them. Technically, you could have any conveyor belt just spiral up into space if you wanted. And there we have it. Now our turbines are being output on the other side of the planet alongside this graphene production line. So I can grab the copper from relatively nearby, do something a bit similar, and we'll have everything we need to make some purple containers of something that we'll need for something later, I seem to remember. Before that though, I finally bothered to craft the gas giant harvesting thing. So here we are on the surface of the gas giant. You can only build the thing at the equator, so I eventually find where the equator is on the planet, and we slap down this giant floating collection platform. I was wondering how this thing is going to work. Luckily it's relatively simple, it doesn't require any fuel or any energy. I guess because it's implying that some of the hydrogen it's harvesting is being used as its own fuel, but it still makes a profit in terms of hydrogen. And of course it gives us this fire ice, whatever that is. So now our interstellar logistics station can import the fire ice from the gas giant, not a very long journey handily enough. And we have this new production line of ice going out to a new area where we can start processing the ice into graphene and liquid hydrogen, which we're going to need as part of the Casimir crystals production process. The other thing we need is crystal titanium, which is actually here. It's used as part of the yellow cubes production factory. However, I need to use the surplus, so I need to be producing more than the yellow cubes production area is using. But we're not producing that much because we're lacking yellow crystals, which are an ingredient of crystal titanium. The yellow crystals, the organic crystals as they're called, is coming from this rather large production area that itself is lacking something. We don't have enough plastic. The plastic supply is actually being split here, so we're not even using all of it. That's because we're also using the plastic to make the particle fibers that are part of the purple production factory to the north. So we can't draw away from that really without hampering production of things we actually need. So that means we need to make more plastic, so we continue down the conveyor belts to find out where the plastic's coming from, and here it is. Here the plastic has all of its input ingredients, so we're no longer facing a lack of supply of something, it's just that there's a lack of production, and indeed there's also a lack of space here to expand the production in a neat looking way, so we've sort of maxed out our plastic production without making things look a bit different. So it's time to do just that. We can hack our way out of this situation by siphoning off the input to the plastic production line to make a new production line somewhere else. It's a logistical nightmare because now it's going to be really hard to tell how much of the resources we actually need to produce to make plastic. We're probably creating problems for ourselves down the line. In fact, I seem to remember I definitely was. We ran out of energetic graphite after this move. Well, anyway, that was solved off camera, and we also did this. Another production line for plastic has been established somewhere else that then pumps its output back into the output of the old plastic production line. Was that enough? 3 extra factories? Well, who knows? There is actually a way to look at your production and consumption across the entire planet of everything, and you might be able to work out how many new factories you need to achieve a goal. But for reasons I'll probably save for a big rant at the end, it's really hard to use that to actually plan what you're going to do for various reasons. The way it outputs the data on that isn't very useful. So I'm doing this the analog way. I look at the end of the plastic production conveyor belt and see that some of the plastic does make it to the end. So in theory, all of the yellow lump factories might eventually get supplied with plastic. I also realized that the arm that's outputting the yellow lumps from this factory in the corner didn't have any power, so that was hampering production as well. Well, there we have it. We now have a certain amount of plastic producing a certain amount of yellow lumps, and that was at least more than it was before, so we're going to have more of a supply of crystals for our Casimir crystal factory. And here I'm setting up another gigantic skyway. This is because I needed the glass to be moved from the far right-hand side of the factory to the far left for another thing that I'm going to be setting up for use after the Casimir crystal factory part of this big process. If this is getting confusing, by the way, well, it was very confusing for me the entire time as well. I somehow managed to work out what I was supposed to be doing bit by bit and trying to focus down single parts of the production process. So there we have it, another gigantic conveyor belt, moving glass left over from the production of solar sails over here to go into the production of titanium glass, which combines the glass with water, and the excess titanium from the other titanium using things now pumped over there. That titanium glass is combined with the Casimir crystals that are eventually created elsewhere somewhere, and we then make some blue things very slowly. I think they were called plane filters. This isn't quite what we need. We need to combine the plane filters with the processor chips that are left over from the production of the purple cubes nearby to make another kind of processor chip, the quantum chip, another blue thing indeed. And this blue thing is at last some kind of milestone, some kind of end to this long series of production nightmares, because it is one of the 2 main ingredients of the green cube. So we're finally producing half of what we need to make those things. The other half being these graviton lenses. Those need diamonds, which we have loads of, that's easy, but it also needs strange matter, which is made of not only the pink things I started setting up to make earlier, but some deuterium, which is made of hydrogen in particle colliders, so we have to set up some whole process for that, and we're going to need more hydrogen, basically. At least for this new process, it's going to be a bit easier. We theoretically have all the ingredients we need somewhere around the factory. We're just going to have to do some logistics to combine them all somewhere. We are being hampered though by the fact that I've got the same issue I had when I was doing the oil refineries earlier. Because these chemical plants output two things, when the output of the second thing, graphene here, ends up being chock-a-block because we're not using it fast enough, then it stops outputting the first thing, the hydrogen, so we actually don't have any hydrogen supply in this area of the factory right now. You can see I had set up a solution to this sort of, and that is to make an artificial demand for graphene by just pulling graphene out of the system into boxes and storing it in case I need it later. So we can just enhance that system by pulling it out faster and adding more boxes. Surely that will solve it. Not a permanent solution at all, but for now some life is breathed back into the system. Sometime later, any and all spare hydrogen is being turned into deuterium somewhere or other, and then fed to the very top corner of the factory, where I can make it into strange matter, combining it with the pink particle containers and some iron. So we now have some green glowing things that we can use as part of our creation of the green lenses to make a bigger green glowing thing. We are getting somewhere now. The other thing we need is diamonds, but that's the easy one because we were producing it somewhere else much earlier. And wherever it's being produced, it's now being output right here in the sky near the strange matter factory. So we can easily start some combinations and get this bit of the factory going. We are producing green lenses at last. So we now have the factory theoretically outputting everything we need to do green science. However, it is a very tenuous setup, and this production line was not working much more than it was working because something was always missing. Right now, we're missing the pink lumps, which require graphene. And that's a pretty good problem to have because, of course, we have overproduction of graphene in one part of the factory. The old graphene source was underproducing, so now a giant skyway allows us to combine the two lines, and at last we have, well, probably still too much graphene, but we're actually using it a little bit more effectively and not just putting it in a box somewhere for now. That's going to help out, but of course we'll just immediately run out of something else soon enough. However, in theory, we can see here we have a green cubes factory running. It doesn't really have the ingredients coming into it, so it's going to very rarely actually make a cube. But we will one day get a few of them. We just need to get a few thousand of them, and that's going to take a while. Thus begins my nightmare battle to get this production line to really flow, because it now has so many stages behind it. We're so deep in the different tiers of industry that every time something breaks, it breaks everything, and then if you fix it, you've probably broken something else in the process. Right now, looks like we don't have a continuous enough supply of silicon to keep the processor factory and the crystal silicon factories going, which are required for various other things down the line. So this brings me back to the other planet to try and get as much silicon as possible. We're mining all of the silicon, and this is actually all the silicon on the planet as well. There is only one vein, so we're just sort of bringing it up as fast as possible. And I thought this might be a good point to rant about the issue we have with economic planning that I hinted at earlier. It's that essentially, while the game does have this stats menu seen here, where you can see what you're producing and how much you're consuming, what you can't look up is something that seems essential and also seems so simple to tell the player. The game has this information in it somewhere, but it doesn't tell you, and that is what the demand is and what your maximum possible production is. So to clarify, your consumption here is just how much the factory is using. It's not how much the factory needs to use to run at max capacity. So what we don't have is a production goal. We don't know how much we need to increase production to reach a certain level. All we can do is overproduce and say, well, consumption is lower than production, so I guess that's okay. But then with production, we have a similar issue, where the production of something is just how much you're outputting now, not factoring in things like production lines being clogged because you're outputting so much. So what we don't know is how much we could be outputting from our current system. And this issue just permeates through the entire game, because every time you make something that's not at the extreme base of the production chain, you're going to have to make something possibly as well before it. Or to put it another way, if you're making a tier 2 production building that's using something from tier 1, when you expand your second tier, you might need to expand the first tier as well. And that's a numbers game. You might not need to if tier 1 is already overproducing by enough to support the new tier 2 expansion. And you can't really look up the numbers to see what you need to do there, even though they should exist in the game. It should be easy enough to tell the player that. And of course, once you're like 8 tiers down, as we are now, and you're changing something at the 7th or 9th tier, and there's a huge knock-on effect going back through the system whenever you add a new machine to it, well, it just turns into a huge nightmare. So this is going to be the rest of the game for me, essentially just trying to get these green cubes to come out the green cube factory and battling every single other part of the factory into trying to continuously work, while also taking into account that some of our resources are beginning to run out, so production is going to start going down no matter what I do. Looks like I want some more hydrogen there, so I'm putting down some more harvesters on the gas giant. We now have enough silicon by the looks of things, but not enough titanium after I've returned to the factory. So yes, the battle continues. I'm trying to get more hydrogen to go into the line, because that was a massive thing we were lacking. We're not producing enough deuterium to run the strange matter factory, and before that we don't have enough hydrogen to run the Casimir crystals factory. So that's like a stage 8 and stage 6 thing that needs more hydrogen to go into it. Well, broadly speaking, we've got ourselves half a planet covered in machines that are always hungry. My only real strategy to work out what to do to make the machine work better is to walk around and look at the production lines. My overall goal is to have all of the production lines just be clogged up, because overproducing is the only safe way to know you're actually getting your maximum output out of the things further down the production line. So we're going to do that, and I'd really like to see not only the ability to see your demand and max possible production of your current setup, but the ability to cordon off parts of the factory into segments and say, what resources does this one segment use, and have that pop up on the screen. You really need to be able to do something like that if, say, you want to have more than one iron source. So you either have all of your iron production in the solar system be channeled into one conveyor belt so you can use the global numbers that it gives you, or you need to be able to portion off bits of the economy and get their stats separately. Well, I wished I had those numbers, because I found myself not knowing what to do for about 10 hours while standing around and just firefighting all the time. What I'm looking at here though is the fact that we don't have enough power production, and we're actually now not drawing enough power from the Dyson swarm. We've got to the point when I've put so many ray receivers down all over the planet that we need more stuff up around the sun to actually use those ray receivers. And because we need more power, I thought I might as well actually do that. Obviously what I can do is just put down more planetary power generation right here. I could just craft millions of wind turbines, for example, which is what I've been doing so far. However, just for fun, I decided to start getting crazy and do something a lot more complicated and a lot less effective, as it turns out, but I thought might be entertaining anyway. We're going to not only expand the Dyson swarm, we're going to start actually building a Dyson sphere. I used a planetary logistics station to ship over to the right-hand side of the factory. Well, essentially stuff that's made of ultimately titanium and silicon, the things that we don't have enough of. So we're already wasting some resources making Dyson sphere components, little cross-shaped things. And what I thought I was going to do with those was shoot them into space using this gigantic thing you can make, which is actually crushing one of the oil conveyor belts there. Luckily it doesn't seem to do anything bad. So now we need to design the Dyson sphere. And this is where things are going to fall apart, because I actually don't have the research you need to build anywhere but on the equator of the orbit you choose. So we actually can't make a sphere or even anything close to that. The only thing I can make is a line, and not really knowing what I was doing, I ultimately made this line of Dyson sphere nodes. This is the most expensive and least effective possible Dyson shell design, I believe, and we're doing it the easy way, allowing the rotation of this model to move the selection pointer for me. True luxury right here. So what I'm doing is effectively making millions of the things we only need a few of, and what you're supposed to do is make, say, a square of these nodes I'm putting down, and then put solar panels in between them. I don't think I've actually invented the ability to make the solar panels for the Dyson shell, so instead we're just doing this, and I still was pretty sure I was on the right track. I realised I can't put the Dyson Sphere components into the launch thing, which eventually led me to discover I'm actually supposed to put in rockets instead. This led me to the far left-hand side of the factory, where I had some of the components I needed to start making these engine things, which are a component of the deuterium fuel rods, which are a component of the rocket ships we need to send to the Dyson Sphere. However, to make those little engine parts I needed various other things, including more magnets, which are currently being produced on the other side of the factory, and I don't have enough of them already. For this, I decided to start a new magnet factory next to the rocket launch site, because I can slap down this planetary logistics tower right here, since I'll need it afterwards anyway. We'll have the magnets produced here be shipped over to the rocket parts factory, the parts will then come back to go into the rockets factory, and all together something good will end up happening here, but of course we're using tons of resources. In particular, we're using deuterium, which we already didn't have enough of as earlier noted, so we're going to barely ever actually produce these fuel rods, meaning we'll make very little progress on the Dyson Sphere. But I was still convinced that would be a good idea to try and make the sphere faster to get more power, because I didn't really know how much power it was going to give me, thinking I guess it will be a lot. But as mentioned, because of my poor design, it's going to be about the minimum amount it possibly can give us, which isn't very much as it's going to turn out. Well, for now, we have flown over to set up the rest of the machine. To make the rockets, I also need to use quantum chips, an ingredient in our green cubes, which also use processors, another rare ingredient that we severely lack. I suppose the takeaway I'm getting at here is that this very complex, high-level production line we're doing to make these Dyson Sphere components is going to be ruining everything else, but I was willing to ruin it because I thought this was going somewhere. So our science production is going to be cut quite a bit, especially the high-end stuff. I did expand the hydrogen production by adding more of those graphene factories. However, this comes with the downside of also expanding graphene production, so we need to do something about this. And I decided to expand upon my terrible idea from earlier, as well as just putting some of it in a box. We'll make it more long-term by adding loads more boxes. Now we're thinking this is the most simple design, and I guess it's going to work. It's very cheap because these boxes are really easy to craft. And I ultimately came up with this weird system where it's got these arms constantly passing the graphene between the boxes. This is to maximize the amount of box space we can use without having to have a complex conveyor belt system moving the graphene to all of the different boxes at the back or something. Maybe this is better than the absolute worst possible design for that, I don't know. Eventually, we have some rockets produced and we see them go down this conveyor belt and into the silo. So now we're going to see a transformation as those tiny boxes of rocket convert into real massive rockets and shoot off, and they are made of the rockets to some extent Dyson Sphere components. So that's how the components get to the sphere, and that conveyor belt of components just sitting there is going to be doing nothing at all. Off they go. So now you have to wait for them to go over to the build location and start building things. It's a bit deceptive because you see one of the nodes has already appeared here. It takes 50, I think, ship launches to make one node, but the node appears after the first ship has launched, not even when the first ship arrives. So it looks like we've made some progress and built something here. We actually haven't really. So we can see on the right, it says something about cell points underneath the structure points. Somehow, in a way that I never discovered, you can put solar panels on your Dyson Sphere, but I, as mentioned, did not discover that. So instead we just have the nodes. The nodes do also function as solar panels, so this is going to generate some power. It's just very expensive and I guess isn't going to generate that much. And suffice to say, it's not getting us anywhere near the amount of power we need. I then made a massive logistical breakthrough. I discovered I can burn the graphene for power, so that's going to solve two problems. One problem was actually caused by trying to solve the second problem. This solves both at the same time. We really don't need that Dyson Sphere, but we're doing it. It is the name of the game after all. So with this, we can have as much hydrogen production as we need by just burning all of the excess graphene. And this is a more long-term solution than the boxes thing, probably anyway. It actually doesn't generate very much power doing this either, so it's not really a solution to the power issue. But of course, as I think I mentioned earlier, I've invented fusion power plants and I'm just simply not using them. That's the sort of real-life reason you probably wouldn't build a Dyson Sphere. You can make a very similar system on the ground, somewhere convenient, and just have a fusion reaction be contained instead of using a star's fusion reaction to make your power. Well, I ended up doing this instead. I decided to use more solar sails by setting up more guns around the place. Because solar sails are actually made of graphene, so this is another way to solve the graphene crisis. We can put them into more sails and expand the Dyson Swarm instead. And the Swarm is going to produce a lot more power for a lot less resource input. I guess its max capacity will be lower ultimately in the very end than making a big Dyson Sphere would be. However, for now, this is a much more effective and cheap way to get power, and we're going to need to be doing this a lot more actually. It will turn out in retrospect I probably should have made a gigantic Dyson Swarm already by this point, because the power requirements of the factory are going to be shooting up towards the end of our quest to do whatever we're actually doing here, get to the end of the tech tree. That's all the game's objective actually is. We started to run out of iron, the raw iron ore, so I had to start mining it elsewhere on the planet and conveyor belting it around the planet and then feeding it into the existing iron systems. And I went really overboard on this because I wanted to never worry about it again, so I've just completely clogged up the iron ore supply, hoping that will last until the end of the game essentially. Here I was just chilling, watching the Dyson Swarm being constructed. It's nice to watch our work travelling across the sky as the guns expand our work, and I've edited the orbits a bit to have that cool cross shape as well. All looks pretty good, and you can tell that my guns are too close to the logistics tower obviously. Sometimes those towers will be blocking their line of sight. Now here's the beginning of the final stage of the game. We've now researched the white cube, the ultimate cube that is a combination of all the other cubes. So we're going to be making the ultimate maximum complexity factory now that's going to just be using everything we've done so far. To do this research, just called Mission Completed. If you research this, you win. So that's what we've been actually working towards. The catch is we also need antimatter to make these white cubes. And I did already have an inkling of how we were going to get that, because you can make it out of something called critical photons. And I had seen earlier I'd researched the ability to make critical photons out of our ray receivers getting the power from the Dyson Swarm. You can change their mode to, instead of generating power, to generate this commodity, the photons that are in a box or something I guess. And those photons can be put into a particle accelerator to make antimatter. So we now jump to over near the rocket launch site, where I'm going to make what is essentially a photon farm. I've crafted tons of the ray receivers, and I'm going to use this space that I was originally going to use to have mass Dyson Sphere stuff production to instead do this, because I've now given up on making the Dyson Sphere, although the rocket plan I had set up earlier is still going, so I'm still going to be wasting resources making the pointless stuff I'd planned already. So anyway, we set down the ray receivers, and now during the day at least, this will produce critical photons, and we output them towards the particle accelerator nearby. I was looking at the power data here because I was thinking, are we going to have power issues? It looks like we're not, but once again we're going to be slightly hampered by the data not being exactly what we need it to be. Luckily in this case I can find out what's going on. Essentially, we're not really producing very many critical photons, and that's because we need to multiply the power output of the Dyson stuff by like 5 times to actually have enough non-critical photons hitting the ray receivers for them to get their max production. Therefore, while we're sort of meeting our power goals, we're not really. We've got enough power to run our machines, but we need to actually be producing, in effect, way more power, but specifically from the Dyson Swarm. Well, I ignored that for now because I wanted to set up the rest of the line, because we're getting close to a situation where, in principle, the game is complete. Nearby, I set up our White Cubes Research Lab factory, here discovering a feature late in the game that allows you to remove veins to build through them, and you can actually get the veins back later. It doesn't delete them or anything like that. Not that I'm going to in this case. So yes, I make some space to begin conveyor belting in all of the excess cubes. We need all of the cubes in the research district to also come out the other side and go towards this new white cubes production area. Things are getting pretty messy, but there's always some space with 3 dimensions to work with, so we eventually get all of the conveyor belts to also come over here. We then link up with the antimatter conveyor belt and have all 6 inputs going in to make our white cubes. The process has begun. We are getting very close to a perfect machine that will complete the game for us. I did have to set up this little twisty output system because you can't have the little arms move more than 3 tiles away from the edge of buildings. So we can't output to the sides essentially, so we have to output to a different side and just have less space to produce in. But that's fine, we don't need that space. And yes, that conveyor belt will now take some white cubes back over to near the research lab area, and then we'll be in business. Only one thing I had to remember, which I remembered then, we need to actually put that research in the queue so it does happen at some point. And there we have it. From here, the game is theoretically complete, if we don't run out of the resources needed to keep the machine going. The final output of the grand machine is here, but the various inputs all along the way and in the middle too are going to be of questionable longevity. So we can't quite wait around for victory, and even if I did, it would take a very long time. We certainly need to increase production. I think it was something like 10 hours to do the research at my current level of white cubes production. Some good news is that the production of antimatter makes hydrogen as a byproduct, so I made a massive conveyor belt across the entire planet to have that hydrogen go and join the other hydrogen usage area where the fire ice is being processed. And we can also safely say here that the whole just burn all of the graphene plan seems to work. The production lines are flowing nicely, so we're still outputting about as much hydrogen from those refineries as we can. Looks like I was also setting up tons of batteries here. You need to charge batteries to make the gas giant extractors, so I was clearly planning on getting some more hydrogen and more ice by going to put another one up there. Well, it's all go here. It looks very satisfyingly complicated what's happening here, although it's simpler than it looks because some of the production lines just split and recombine here and there. Here's what it's all for though. The deuterium factories aren't running at full capacity, so yes, we still do need more hydrogen to have all the stuff downriver from that be working at fuller capacity. Here was a little flyby of the Dyson swarm on my way to the lava planet, all looking very nice and shiny, with more and more of the Dyson Sphere starting to be pointlessly built as well, which looks interesting at least. And now for a nice soft landing on the surface. Your bot does have a durability stat, which makes me think there is some way to destroy it, but so far, no matter how hard I fly into the ground, we always seem to be fine. The reason I came to this planet is to attend to silicon once again, because we still don't have enough silicon and our production is falling, and this is due to, well, the amount of silicon in the solar system falling. This one vein on the surface here is the only source of silicon in this solar system, but there is a way to make artificial sources, which is what I'm doing here. You can have your smelters make tiny amounts of silicon ore from massive amounts of stone by just extracting trace amounts of it. So it's super inefficient. We're going to waste all of our stone, but I don't need the stone for anything else in particular right now. I experimented trying to use this thing called an automatic piler. I didn't work out what it did, so the less said about that the better really. I was hoping I could somehow get more stone in front of the smelters without having more crazy conveyor belt systems, and that ultimately failed. So we have some more silicon production there, and back near the photon farm, there were 4 sets of stone veins, or 5 even, only one of which is in use right now. So we're going to start setting up more silicon ore production here. Extremely inefficient. It's hard to actually get enough stone in front of the smelters to keep them running because they use so much so quickly to make a tiny amount of end product. But at this stage, we just need something that's better than nothing, because that is the alternative. Or at least I should say, the alternative if I'm unwilling to leave the solar system to look for more silicon, and that is actually an option we've already unlocked, but we'll take a look at that later because I was very desperate to do it without, essentially, to not make things much more complicated. Here I am inspecting the other end of the problem. Looks like we've got some processors coming out, so something's happening. We just need enough to make some green cubes, because we only need a few of those to make the white cubes. And then we'd need more than that to go on to make the Dyson Sphere stuff, but as mentioned, we don't necessarily need to be doing that, or need to be doing it at all really. So later on, we've got everything we need except enough antimatter. We're at about half power satisfaction, so we're getting somewhere. We could be producing more antimatter though, not only by getting more solar sails out there to increase our power input, but by doing this. We can feed one of the ingredients of green cubes into the ray receivers. This increases their critical photon generation. I had to do it in this weird way, as you can see, with loads of arms and curly bits. But the other interesting thing is it increases the time of day range at which they work. So I'm guessing these magical lenses are now bringing light down from space, even though it's not hitting the receiver directly. So we are pulling down the photons even at night, but it also increases the power requirements. So while we've been increasing our power output, we now have lower satisfaction. But I think the end result is that we are still getting more photons coming out of the system as a whole, just far fewer than it could be outputting if I'd made a gigantic Dyson swarm/sphere earlier on. Well, at this stage, the game came down to just waiting. I spent at least 1 to 2 hours AFK, and the time I was here looks like I was just chilling, watching the sun go by on our pleasant little planet, and our guns shooting at the sun to extort it for more power, so that we can encase it in metal. I'm sure that's what the sun really wants. Here we are a bit later with me simply inspecting the factory. We've almost done the complete the game research, and I wanted to review what had happened. I don't really know how clear it's going to be from watching this video. I don't know if anybody has a sense of like where things are on this planet or how the different parts of this factory connect to each other. I tried to simplify things by having different disconnected things dedicated to different topics of production, if you like, and I think that's the easiest way to set it up, just so you can know where all of your outputs and inputs are vaguely going and where to go and find things later. Well, what we're looking at now is what I made at the start. We've got the research area and the oil refinery area, then to the southwest of that, the place where we have this chocolate block ancillary production zone making plastic and sulfuric acid and things that we needed to craft other things, essentially things that don't have any particular use. And then to the north of that we have the stuff that we made later in the video. We've got the interstellar area where the titanium comes down to make crystals and the titanium alloy. Northeast of that is the zone that provides extra resources to the initial part of the factory because it was running out of iron and copper, and the area that makes glass and the components of the solar cells and then ships them off somewhere else. And then going over to the left we have the famous processor factory that usually doesn't work and itself is required to make all the other stuff around it, including the various cubes and their billions of components. You can see I've downsized cube production quite a lot now to make our economy a bit easier, because we just don't need that many cubes anymore. Well, whatever. The machine ended up being pretty big. It covered more than half the planet, although the planet isn't particularly big because we are on a moon here. And later on, there it is. The game is just completed while I'm standing around. Good, we have done the thing. I think the thing in the sort of lore of the setting is that we're setting up this Dyson Sphere to power a hypothetical civilization that exists elsewhere in the galaxy. So we've come on in, made something of a Dyson Sphere, I guess, to give them some power, and we've done enough by the looks of things. By the way, on the left there, it says I got a couple of extra achievements, as well as just completing the game. I looked it up later. Those achievements are incredibly rare, so I truly am the chosen one. It's actually quite rare to complete the game, but to complete the game without dismantling the landing capsule is very rare. Well, I didn't know you could, so there we go. And the other thing about not obtaining rare ores, well, I guess I was just unlucky because there were no rare ores in our system. I think that's a special kind of ore vein you can mine to get more materials or unique materials, and we just didn't have any of them, so we have done everything the hard way, effectively. Now I'm looking around at the other stars nearby, so this is where we would go to get resources as our solar system begins to deplete, and we really need to do that right now to go and try to find some silicon planet. We actually don't have the research required to see what's in the other solar systems, so I'm going to queue that up right now. But I don't really need that, because I didn't really intend to continue making the Dyson Sphere. You could keep making it to increase your power output, and we'll see why that's useful a bit later, actually. But instead, I wanted to go on an adventure. I did want to try and use the warp tech that was invented to go somewhere. All we need to start off is a few green cubes. These can be processed into loads of these space-time warpers, so that's easy enough. I thought that was going to be effectively enough to go on a space adventure. Well, it actually isn't, and we're going to find out that the hard way. So, I now prepared for the voyage and went to find my destination here on the star map. And it's the one star that looks a bit different, the purple one, because that's actually a black hole, the only one in our star cluster, I think. So I thought, let's go and visit a black hole. This isn't going to contribute to the Dyson Sphere Program at all, I don't think, but it might be adventurous and interesting all the same. So we just point ourselves in the direction of the black hole. It's 18 light years away, so it might take us a while to get there. But with the space-time warper, well, that will be a little bit less difficult, but still relatively difficult as it turns out. We say goodbye to our beautiful star with all of its random stuff now orbiting it. It's all just going to continue powering the machine that's building itself until the machine just stops due to lack of resources. And that will be that. Humanity has depleted the universe a little bit more and progressed towards our eventual demise. So I eventually work out how to press caps lock, which activates warp mode. But it doesn't work like I thought it was going to. I thought it would effectively just be a teleport, in that I would just jump and suddenly be there. Actually, it just means you travel very fast, and while you're traveling fast, you still use your mech's power. And that's going to be the big problem we face here, because as you can see, we're about to run out of power, and we did not reach the destination. So we just sort of jumped 6 light years or so into the void, and here we are, just in the void. I was surprised the game bothers to simulate the massive amounts of space between stars, but it is here in the game world. This is a very big open world, I suppose, in that regard, because it has all this nothing out here that you can gradually drift through. So that's nice. And the issue we have is that I'm still powering the mech off coal for some reason. So if we're going to get this space travel going, we have to get the shovels out and put more coal in the warp drive. There's got to be a better way, but I really didn't think I would need energy to do this. I thought the space-time warper would just put me at the destination. So, now we wait. We will eventually reach our destination if I do nothing. But to speed things up, we can use the coal to fill up our batteries and eventually get another warp jump. But I'll need a few to actually get there, so this is going to take a while. Here I was after AFKing for a bit. About half an hour later, I jump back in and jump towards the black hole, again not making it. After another jump sometime later, we're getting close, and here's where another poor expectation came in. What I expected was that once I got close to the thing, I would fall out of warp into the sort of rendered space around it. Well, no, because it turns out everything is rendered and simulated. We just shoot right past it. I was supposed to hit caps lock to drop out of warp at an appropriate location. Well, we drop out on the other side of it. We're not too far away, we can at least see it now. But I don't have enough energy to turn round, so we're actually drifting further away now. We gradually build up the power to face the other direction, and then start drifting back towards the black hole. Took about 5 minutes, but here we are at the black hole. My intention here, if you were wondering, was to die. I thought I'm just going to fly into the black hole and end it all, end the nightmare of having to live in a universe with finite resources, effectively. It's too stressful to have to deal with that. I'll just go into this black hole and solve my problems. Turns out though, the black hole, well, it functions like a gas giant, effectively. It's just a big lump that you can't actually go into. You get close to it and it automatically turns you to start flying around it instead. Curiously on the right there, this black hole is absolutely packed with tons of resources. I'm guessing if we could slap down some gas giant collectors or something here, we could be picking up all of that stuff. Could be useful. Well, we get another rare achievement for orbiting a black hole. That's useful. And now we're just here, effectively. I thought maybe I could land, because it was talking about all these resources on the surface like iron ore. I thought surely there must be a surface that the iron ore is on, but maybe we can just collect from it. Looking around is pretty confusing because there's this massive accretion disk and some sort of lensing effect going on as well. Very cool for space nerd stuff. And there, flying by in the distant distance, is where we're supposed to be. Well, hopefully our boss, that poorly translated robot, won't look for us here. We can hide from the company. What I wanted to do, since I hadn't died, was to try and escape the black hole. But interestingly, it does simulate the black hole's powerful gravity well, so it's actually quite hard to leave now that we're here. we're constantly being decelerated, and if I don't hold down W, my mech will automatically turn and just fall back into the black hole. So I'm having to spend power to remain facing in the right direction, and then we very slowly fly away from it. After a long time, we get far away enough that the gravity well stops having much of an effect. I think it was about 1 or 2 AU you had to get before you were kind of on your own again. And we fly off towards the other thing that was in this area. There was an object orbiting the black hole. Getting closer, we can see it's a big ball of ice. Well, let's go and crash into it to see what's going on. So this is going to function like a real planet. And in particular, it's a much better planet than where we started. So you could say we've made some kind of progress here. We're now bathed in the light of the fusing in the accretion disk, I suppose, of the black hole. There's probably a whole bunch of radiation right here, but it still feels good. And yes, this planet is much better than where we started because it has all of the stuff on it. All of the resources are together in one location. There's loads of silicon and titanium, so less issues there. It does lack coal and copper, so we'd probably have to bring those from the black hole to set up properly here. We've got a little bit to get started with, but in the long term, we could make some kind of better Dyson Sphere here, I think, with less complications and less energy required as well. For now though, we're not going to do that. I set up tons of wind turbines, set up a power thing that allows me to power the mech off of our electricity grid, and now I can stand here. We're actually out of coal, so we can't fuel the mech. We really can't leave. We're kind of stuck here forever now, but that doesn't matter, as I said, because we can play the entire game again from here, and probably it would be easier too, especially since we start with all of the techs already unlocked, so we can probably skip some stuff, and we don't have to make most of the cubes, or any of the cubes really, just have to make Dyson Sphere components to continue progressing from here. But I'm not going to do that because this is where I decided to finish the campaign. We're going to leave our guy in his new hermitage retirement, hidden on an ice lump orbiting a black hole at the edge of the star cluster. Hopefully our boss will never find us here, and we will escape the embarrassment of not having made a particularly good Dyson Sphere. Maybe someone else can come and take over for us. Pretty nice though, and I like the fact that I was able to come here, even though it was probably a bad idea. It was cool that we can just run away and go and hide in a black hole somewhere. And to finish off my adventure in Dyson Sphere Program, I had to come back to where I started, the galaxy map. It did say that once we did that research that officially completes the game, we now have our own star in the galaxy map. So we're here among all the other stars that I was looking at, wondering what they were before. Now, one of the dots is the Dyson Sphere-like thing we produced in this video. It is out there. I struggled to actually click on it because I was trying to get the camera to focus on it more. But yes, our numbers have been added to the other numbers. We have contributed to the galaxy. I noticed it says number of engineers 1, which was about the time when I realized, oh yeah, I guess this is a multiplayer game of some kind. Always nice to realize that after you've played the whole game. Clicking around, we can see that the other Dyson Spheres have quite a lot of people working on them, which is probably going to make things way easier. And I wondered in retrospect, is a lot of the stuff I didn't like about this game sort of caused by the fact there's supposed to be somebody else doing things at the same time as you? Because my main criticism of the game is that as it goes on, there's so much work you have to do that the part that I liked, building and just looking around, becomes more and more rare, and you spend more time going back to things you already did to fix them effectively. And while you could go on to make more Dyson Spheres in your cluster, that's going to get worse and worse as suddenly your supply of something which is like 10 light years away has reduced by 5%, and that's going to slow down the whole machine, so you have to go there and try to sort it out. But during the large amount of time it takes to do that, 3 other things would probably go wrong somewhere else due to lack of supply, or a conveyor belt clogging when you didn't think it would, or something like that. And I can imagine it just becoming a complete nightmare stalemate. And you can see in the top right, there appears to be somehow the ability to make your resources infinite. And that's the other thing I was thinking about while playing. I wanted it to be a bit less nightmarish, and having those numbers I mentioned earlier would probably help with that. And the other sort of relaxation factor would be to just have infinite resources, because I actually could see myself going on to make a gigantic number of Dyson Spheres and make them huge, but I really don't want to tackle the fact we're going to run out of everything, and actually quite soon in our home system as well. It really sort of makes me think I don't really want to do it, because it's too real. It's like, yes, we could make ever bigger and greater things, but you still die afterwards anyway, and not really very much happens after that. So I think playing the game with infinite resources and just trying to make the number big could be a nice, relatively mindless and relaxing thing to do, especially if you found out how to get other people to come into your game. I must say I never saw the option to bring other people in. I'm guessing you just had to select multiplayer right at the very start, and I ignored that instinctually and hence don't even really know how to use it. But in theory, you can get hundreds of people in on your Dyson Sphere to all make it at once, and collectively produce a very big number, which is always nice. Overall, I found that Dyson Sphere Program had a pretty nice vibe too. The way it's very optimistic, and the poorly translated robot man is very encouraging and constantly tells you that you're advancing civilization with your minor achievements. It somehow adds a sense of importance to what you're doing in a way that I guess wouldn't be found in a more realistic style of construction game, because a lot of what we're doing is just completely depleting a planet, removing its ecosystem and such, for no particular reason, just to make a number go up. We don't know what this number does, we've just been instructed by a robot to do it, and we went right ahead. Well, it was fun doing it. As I said, I had a lot of nightmares. It was sort of stressful a lot of the time, and I spent a lot of time AFKing as well, which probably impacted my experience negatively by stopping me from actually optimizing things and spending more time preventing the nightmares from happening in advance. I feel like if I played the game again, it would probably be much more fun and satisfying, because I would know what I'm doing effectively. But because the show must go on, I'll have to go and play something else instead. I should note, by the way, that I completed the game in something like 30 hours or 20 something hours. There's actually a super rare achievement for completing the game in 25 hours. So that means while I thought my machines weren't particularly efficient and it wasn't going that well, and I spent tons of time AFKing, in actuality, very few people have completed it faster than this, so I'm now going to walk away claiming that I am one of the best Dyson Sphere Program players of all time. So there you have it. If I'd tried again a little bit harder, we could probably cement ourselves as one of the true legends of making the big number become slightly larger. But alas, there are other games and other numbers that we need to make bigger or smaller in some cases, all sorts of variety of number operations to perform in a variety of different software packages. So why don't you join me to see another such software package coming soon? The next game I played after this was the new Starship Troopers RTS, mainly because I got sent it for free, and while most games I get sent for free go into the spam filter and I don't see them, this one didn't. I don't know why. Something about the way they wrote their email made it come into my inbox, and because I saw it, I just thought, you know what? I will play it, because I like the movie Starship Troopers. So join me for a vague commentary / review of that thing coming soon.